Welcome back, everybody. I am your Las Vegas Raiders beat writer for Sports Illustrated and the host of the Las Vegas Raiders Insider Podcast, Hondo Carpenter, joined each week by my buddy Johnny Guitars. And you guys have asked, and so he gives it every week. Let's open with a riff, Johnny.
All right, now we're ready.
All right, now we're ready. John, we got a lot to talk about. I'm sure you saw the podcast where we literally went down the list of teams and how they draft and how many have had top 10 picks in the last 10 years. And there's a consistent pattern. The teams that have the most top 10 picks are the teams that usually end up not doing well. I mean, we've talked about it all off season, but somebody actually suggested to me, an NFL executive, he said, I think you should do it on your pod. Just go over 10 years of research. He goes, let the numbers tell the truth. When you saw that and how bad the teams are that consistently draft in the top 10, it told the story of the value of the first round draft pick, didn't it?
I think it did because it's not impossible to survive missing on a first round pick, but it seems like if you miss or have trouble with more than one within a certain year span, maybe a 3-year span, you're going to have a real problem and set your franchise back unless there's some exception that comes kind of out of nowhere to make up for it. It's not that Jalen Hurts is an exception, but the best example I can think of is the Eagles go down the wrong road with Carson Wentz and then they get somebody to replace him and it's like they didn't miss a beat. That so rarely happens. There is a pattern. Some of those teams and some of those owners, to borrow off of what Bill Polian said, they're probably the reason that some of those struggles continue to happen.
Yeah, and John, so for example, on Wednesday's podcast, I talked about, one miss, it maybe wobbles you a little bit like a boxer that takes a punch, but it doesn't knock you out. 2 misses in a row set your franchise back. 3, you're going to be in rebuilding mode. I thought that was fascinating to hear that from an NFL executive.
It's really kind of a fast track. It's kind of a fast track in the wrong direction. And when I saw that, I was reminded of NFL coaches with a high level of success that left the sport and then came back and really struggled with some drafts. Joe Gibbs, for example, moves way up and takes Jason Campbell. Don't know that he was ever really an NFL starter. It was kind of a reach. It was a problem. Obviously, John Gruden with the Raiders didn't draft terribly well. So when I see somebody either coming back to the sport or maybe coming up, if we see another guy come up from the college level anytime soon, that's going to be in my mind. And if I were one of those teams or one of those franchises, I really believe in managing the downside, especially in the high rounds. Hondo and I have talked about this for years. I err on the side of give me the lineman. I err on the side of give me the guy that's least likely to miss, because the damage and the pain of missing, or let's say you're just grabbing wide receivers at the top of the draft a couple times in a row. Lion fans can remember 20 years ago. Boy, you're on a fast track to picking again in the top 10 very soon.
Yeah, and one general manager told me something that I think you'll find interesting. The problem with constantly picking in the top 10 is that if a couple of those guys hit, now you have major extensions that forces your team into some salary cap struggles because just the way it works. So you want to stay out of the top 10 and hope those guys hit because those extensions aren't as big. John, let's get right to it. We got so many topics to cover that are absolutely germane to the National Football League, which is what we do each week. I cover the Raiders, microly. You cover the NFL macroly. So we really get a good view. But John Harbaugh says, don't worry about the hip drop tackle. He's the first coach to come out and really talk about this. What did you think of his comments?
I thought it was pretty big. The basic, the core of it is he's saying, hey, you got a 3-part play. So he's defining that hip drop as 3 parts. And he's saying you got to be close enough. You got to get him around the hips. You got to pull him close. You got to swing your hips through and drop the back of his legs. But here's the key that everybody needs to take away from the top of football to the very bottom. We talk about fundamentals. He points right to maybe the best. This is John Harbaugh saying, if you're that close, wrap him up, tackle him, and take him to the ground like Ray Lewis used to do, and everybody did for 100 years before that. So John Harbaugh is saying, this is not that big of a deal. Let's not freak out about it. And oh, by the way, maybe just do some fundamental tackling, because year in, year out over the history of the sport, that's what's been safest and best for the game. I'm not trying to pat John Harbaugh on the back again. I did that before his team came up short in the playoffs. But Ray Lewis tackling is one of the few guys that I've got a picture of in my head that's never going to go away. It's kind of a textbook, just runs on a loop. When you think of how do I tackle as a linebacker, it's a pretty good place to start.
You know, I got a text from an executive today who told me he thought John was doing something brilliant. He was sending a message to the NFL and the officials. All right, it's 3 parts. So there better be 3 parts before you threw the flag. He goes, I thought John was getting out ahead of it, saying, all right, you better make sure there are 3 parts because we're talking about it in the offseason. That's what we think it is. I thought that was an interesting angle. Your thoughts on that?
That's the first thing I thought when I read it. I said, this guy's breaking it down to 3 parts. It's almost like a warning shot saying, you guys have laid this out. You better stick to this and not make it much of a judgment call or not make it loosey-goosey or inconsistent. These guys, and I'm talking about both of these guys, both Harbaughs, as much as we love football, as much as you love football out there, there's no way they love it any less. This is a football mind. Whenever it's to football, it's going at a super fast speed, John Harbaugh's. It's very hard to find something he's wrong about. I think he's right here, and I do think he did this with intent. Not a bad idea, especially in April.
Let's talk about Parcells Draft Bible highlights.
Folks, we talked about this before. The 33rd team went ahead and got to the source, got some of the history, the background for Bill Parcells' drafting system. He talks about how it came out of his first trip to New England. And really the key to it is we've got to identify who's doing these jobs on the field and come up with some prototypes. And then we've got to find a grading system against a prototype. We're going to make some room for exceptions and categorize exceptions, but exceptions are rare. He used 2 fantastic exceptions when it comes to height. Barry Sanders, Darrell Green, 2 phenomenal players. But he lays out a couple of things and ties them all together. One of the highlights is no doubt the advice he gets from Al Davis talking about avoiding a dog pound. Now, what is a dog pound? Well, a dog pound would happen if you end up getting a mix of players that is not going to lead you to much success. One of these, one of those, one of those, one of these. And if you end up with a dog pound, basically he says you're going to end up losing, you're going to end up out of a job, and you're not going to have a very put together roster. There's an interesting piece also here. I'll just read Al Davis's quote. This is what he said to Parcells. Your team looks like a dog pound. One of these, one of those, big ones, little ones, ones that bite, ones that don't. That's what you wanted to avoid. And he said if you don't have a prototypical personnel, like what we're looking for out of each position on the field, you're going to end up in that place. Another idea is if you take too many exceptions, you're also on the way to ending up with a dog pound. Whole bunch of different. That is some of the stuff that is interesting about this. The specific height and weight stuff, I don't know how dated it is. It's got to be a little dated because Parcells is not active right now. But the point is they had a system, and they weren't just going in picking the best player available or taking some wild card reach that we've seen some owners do. And they also ended up with a shorter draft board. That was the interesting thing to me. They didn't have 250 guys on their draft board. And it didn't really hurt them. He said there was a year that they ran out, basically. They were down to 3, and one of those guys was a rookie free agent quarterback they signed by the name of Tony Romo. Now, whether you think he was a good quarterback or not, he's got a lot of stats in the NFL, and for an undrafted free agent, he did pretty well, and he was scouted pretty well by that Bill Parcells system.
Interesting. All right, John, what about a smear campaign? Did an offensive coordinator essentially throw a game to interview?
This was a piece of news around the NFL that I hope is not over, because you want to talk about an extraordinary accusation or premise laid out there. LaDainian Tomlinson is saying that the Chargers were up double digits on the papers in the divisional round
Wait. Double digits on who?
the Patriots. That's what he's
Okay.
saying here. And so they're up in a playoff round, and he was wondering if Cam Cameron, who played at Michigan, coached at Indiana, around the NFL for a long time, got a coaching job, the head coaching job at the Dolphins. He was wondering if Cam Cameron just started chucking the ball so he could get to an interview. This is an incredible premise, and it's an incredible thing to even lay out or make any kind of accusation of. It's beyond any reasonable doubt. The answer would be no. I don't have any question that Cam Cameron, at this time, no question at all that he would be doing what he could to try to score as many points, put the then Chargers in position to win. It's insane to think. It's got a lot of people's attention. This is a massive accusation from an absolute Hall of Fame player. Cam Cameron, not a Hall of Fame coach, but this is not a good scene, and I want to see what Cameron has to say in response. This is beyond out of left field. This is really, really, really somewhat unprecedented to bring this out in public.
LT, man, the gift that keeps on giving. Let's talk about Viva Brazil.
About 4,750 miles from Philadelphia, about 12 hours by plane. Yeah, I'm sure it is. But so here's the thing. Opening Friday night, we have Packers, we have Eagles. Nobody's really a home team there. Nobody's traveling short. 12 to 14-hour plane flights, 4,700 miles. There's going to be a lot of people walking around up and down the plane. You talk about a lot of changes that happen in the plane relative to salt levels, sodium levels, hydration. This is not a simple task that these teams are going to be asked to do. Now, my first thought was, like so many, what about the time zones? It actually turns out to be 2 hours ahead of Eastern. So time zone wise, neither the Eagles nor the Packers are getting beat up too much. But this is
it's literally like traveling if you're Philly to play a game in Denver. But it's the opposite way, 2 hours the other way.
Yeah, I mean, time zone wise, but this is such a long flight. We're talking about 12 plus hours in the air for very large guys. I hope they give them enough time on both ends of the trip. Is this a good idea? I mean, it's going to be an oddball in a soccer-driven country that is beyond belief into soccer. How many people are really going to care about this? I don't know. I know this. In the past, we've seen some trips like this throw seasons and teams off, different kind of sports. The NFL's got to be fair here to the Packers and the Eagles, both teams with aspirations to make a Super Bowl next year. But that's what it's going to be. It's going to be a Peacock exclusive. And I know a couple folks out there will be watching it just like we.
And the Peacock ratings, thank God they're spending big bucks, because the ratings are the only NFL ratings that are bad. John, what did you think about Brian Kelly made a big prediction?
It wasn't that long ago. We didn't talk about it right away, but now it's coming into focus because Jayden Daniels is going to Washington to meet with Dan Quinn and company there with the currently known as Commanders. Big future in Washington, of course. New stadium, another new team name, fresh start, fresh owner, and a really good-looking head coach. But before then, a couple weeks back, Brian Kelly essentially said he slipped that said, he's going to do really well in Washington. It wasn't about 3 minutes after that clip was taken from, I think it was some kind of maybe a pro day, or they got Kelly somewhere, that I started getting messages from folks up there in the DMV area saying, "Did you see this?" Of course I didn't. It just happened. And I was like, well, is this real? It looks like just an honest slip. Now, obviously, Brian Kelly's not making the pick for Washington, but he is suggesting that Daniels is the guy. Let's talk about Daniels for a second, because a lot of people out there have knowledge and opinions about him. They've seen him. Obviously, Antonio Pierce talked about him. He recruited him as a teenager. The concern there is a Parcells-based concern, I think, having to do with durability and size. How much muscle and weight can this guy add to his frame? because we've seen some longer, leaner guys be really not the greatest durability record at the NFL level. He's an exciting player. To me, I think he's got as much upside as anybody in the draft. I'm not as concerned about the durability, but again, we talked a little about this last week. Teams have got to do some research here to legitimately project how much they can add to the frame of Jayden Daniels to make sure that he's not going to be a durability concern. It's going to be an interesting week, and he's there in Washington. I wonder if he will talk to Coach Kelly before leaving town.
We shall see. All right, let's talk about the UFL is tampering with Bigfoot. And by the way, I am loving this spring football, and the ratings are killing it, which is what you and I have been saying for 10 years. If they would just come together, have one league, have the NFL endorse it. I'm loving it, Johnny. This is good stuff.
I love it. Let's recap the boat here. What I was looking for was a league that would start the week after the Masters. It does not yet start the week after the Masters and end somewhere around July 4th, depending on how many games they played. We're not quite there, but we've got one league together, and there are some people watching it. There's some names that are becoming more familiar. This is year 2. I think it's going to take 4 years to kick into high gear. But talk about kicking. Did you see that guy in Michigan kicking the... I was like, whoa. Well, he kicked a couple of massive bombs, and people noticed in the NFL. And Mike Nolan, who's got an extraordinarily long NFL history and an extraordinary family lineage, he says NFL teams are already contacting this guy, saying, hey, stay away from my guy. He's kicking for the Panthers. This is a remarkable foot. Now, you're kicking inside. Jake Bates is the guy's name. He's kicking inside, but 64 is the one I saw live, and I was like, hello, 52, 62 yards. This is a name that we will see on an NFL roster this fall. It's nice to see this. I like the different mix. I like the three-point conversion that they've got. You know, maybe you could see that. Maybe you could see that sprinkled into the NFL one day as like a one-game use option, kind of like throwing a challenge flag, like, hey, we're going for 3 here. I don't know, but I like seeing this as a testing ground, proving ground. I like seeing players develop, and I still love the foot in football. I'm okay with a big kick. The guy hit it from 64 yards. It was like, hello. We knew that would get somebody's attention.
I'm going to ask you a question. Would you like to see, like there's a three-pointer in football, would you like to see where you can do a kick for 2, kick for 3, a kick for 4? Johnny Guitars, think about it.
Well, that appears to be the way that the game is going. I would like to see. I think I would like to see the goalposts adjusted in at least one of 2 ways. Either, like Belichick says, take them up higher, whether that's a light beam or whether that's an extension. And I do think there's an argument to be made to bring them in a little bit. I like the idea that a field goal is always 3. I'm fine. I'm probably fine there. But what you're talking about is it maybe possible to go back really far and extend it? That would be an interesting idea.
Let me tell you where I'm going with this, okay? So I was visiting with a coach at the league meetings, and I was just saying to him, if you could change rules, what would you change? He said, well, I would like to see a kick 25 yards or in is worth 1 point. 25 to 35 is worth 2. 35, he said, from the 35-yard line to the 50-yard line, he goes, maybe 3. He goes, but anything where you hike the ball from in your territory. So if you're at your 49 and the ball goes back 7, you're now, you're now 68 yards away. He goes, I'd like to see that worth 4. He goes, now here's where the intrigue comes in. He said, if you're down 2 points, or say you're down 3, and you got a big kicker, do you take a kick at your 49? He goes, or do you try to go down with seconds left? I mean, I just love the way he talked about it. I know it's far-fetched, but I think it's something worth interesting because he says as foots get bigger, he goes, let's make a reward for that.
Well, we're talking about something that has a natural proving ground idea fit. This is something prime for the UFL. Who knows? Maybe it's something they're already thinking of. I think there's some innovation that can take place. This is an NFL show. I think the NFL has done well moving the extra point back to where they did. I think there's probably a little bit of an argument that you could scoot it up, but I actually like where it is because it matters. Now, at the college level, they need to back that thing up 10 yards. They need to take their point after and back it up 10 yards. It's ridiculous to be that close. So the idea that the kicking game is going to evolve or should evolve, I think is good. Guys are just unbelievably good now. They're trained. They're giant. As you said, they can kick it from farther and farther. So the argument to be made to stagger the value of the kick based on where the ball is spotted, that seems logical and seems like something that's going to be coming along the way. I would like to just plain, I know he's traveling around doing some camp work, Bill Belichick lately at Washington, at Nebraska. I'd like him to make some notes, and maybe Saban does the same thing, about ideas they think could improve these games. We know he has talked about extending the posts up so you can make a field goal call easier. I'd be curious if he thinks they need to stay the same or need to come in at the pro level. And I'd also be curious if he would be interested in this kind of thing. The reason I say that is people think of Bill Belichick as like really stoic, and maybe has the image sometimes of teaching the way that the game was played back when they were using stone and tablet. That's not necessarily the case. He might surprise us with this because the kicking game has evolved. Those kickers that were kicking for the Giants way back when he was defensive coordinator, where they were kicking from, all that stuff, very different, very, very different than today. Also different, Hondo, and what I would be curious your initial thought of is, would you be giving way too much of an advantage to teams that play half their games inside a dome? Because not everybody does.
Great thought. See, this is what I love. This game is beautiful, and it can be tweaked without taking the game away, but keep tweaking it. I love it. It's like in hockey. I've heard a lot of people say they'd like to see the NHL make the goal a little bit bigger. I mean, even if it's 3 inches in every direction. I'm not saying, no, I like hockey, and I'm a purist, so I'm like, nah, I don't like it. But I'll tell you, I've had some hockey players, friends of mine, who played in the NHL tell me, I think it would just make the game even better. So well, I love that. I love it when you start talking about stuff that can make the game better. I want to see some things in the future. We're going to talk about some things. So, for example, I had an NFL Hall of Famer tell me he thinks there shouldn't be the 10-yard rule for defensive backs where you can put your hand on the player. He said, let's go back to the 70s. Then there's constant interaction. He thinks it's safer. He literally thinks it's safer. He thinks it makes the game better. I don't think they'll ever do it, but I mean, he talked about if it's about player safety, then let them stay engaged. He goes, because if that safety's coming up to make a big hit and there's a corner there, he's got to worry about his teammate too. I love all that. I love all the conjecture. Now, next week, John, we're doing our mock draft. So you're going to give me all 7 rounds for who you think the Raiders you'd like to see him pick. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're looking forward to it. He is the one and only, the legend, the great Johnny Guitars. Johnny, tell him how to find you on X.
At JP Spartan. I hope you like the Masters too if you tune in this week on there.
I can't wait. I'm not even a golfer, but I've been watching this show Full Swing. Have you watched it on Netflix?
I have watched it. They've got some good behind-the-scenes master stuff, and those shows are pretty good. It's very similar to the quarterback show, although not as NFL Films produced. It's not as good. It's not a knock on Full Swing. It's just NFL Films is the best. So they got just getting started, but it is relatively entertaining. It's a different idea, and it's interesting. The Masters has continued to evolve. They've evolved the course. They've evolved things they do around there. And that's why they are arguably the most organized sporting event in the world. Everybody, including the NFL, take a good lesson in sticking with that and making smart decisions to make their game better. We're starting to see that drip from the NFL a little bit. Some of the stuff we talked about today and some of the stuff we'll talk about in the off season here, hopefully will make the NFL product clearly better in 2024 than it was in 2023. And yes, folks, I'm thinking officials as well.
All right, everybody. Follow me on IG at Hondo SR, X formerly known as Twitter, at Hondo Carpenter, and go to si.com/NFL/Raiders.